And I was just getting into the groove there, Branson.
I cut you off right before your maracas. My apologies, Ryan.
I was so
My
excited. I was a little
apologies.
concerned that we'd have to wake everybody up after the elevator music, though, this afternoon.
I chose too good of elevator music for that. My apologies. That's just one of my favorite new tracks that I've discovered. So I thought it'd be some nice energy to start this webinar off this afternoon. No, too calming.
It was good. I enjoyed it.
Perfect. Well, we'd like to welcome everyone this afternoon, and thank you for choosing to join us this afternoon for our webinar on preparing your company for business interruptions. We'd like to welcome, if you are our friend, as by way of being a customer or a client, or if you're a guest by having interacted with us only once or twice. We are IronEdge Group. We are a managed service provider for businesses in Texas as well as nationwide. If you've been following us during our webinar series, you've seen myself, Branson Braid, been here a couple of times, presented, but as well you've seen Dan Mallard, one of our project managers here in our San Antonio office that works with our clients really to get them business solutions all the way through. But I am excited because today we have a treat. Today we have a treat, guys, and we get to get some knowledge from our owner, Ryan Lakin. Ryan Lakin, everybody.
You're the only one excited. Everybody else is just concerned and worried.
Although that is true, I'm not. So I'll continue to be excited because you have a lot to provide us with this afternoon. Yeah. So as we continue through this, I'm interested to see what you have to really contribute on our discussion today on business interruptions and disasters.
Couldn't come at a better time after last night.
So timely. We're really looking out and thoughts and prayers for those communities around us that are affected. But it's really a timely discussion on what do we do as businesses for business interruptions and disasters. And Ryan, being a business owner, I just really want to give you the floor. Where do you really start, and how do you look at the current situation with the hurricane? What does that entail?
Well, at this point, I'm just looking forward to whatever the next pandemic, natural disaster, or crisis is to hit this country. It's been a heck of a last 6 months. It feels like 6 years, honestly, at this point. From everything from fires in the West Coast, fires are back in the West Coast this week, to hurricanes last night, to a global pandemic. So it really is important for all business leaders out there to examine what they're doing as far as how do they maintain business continuity, how do they maintain their operational structure during whatever crisis is thrown our way. And honestly, at this point, I can't guess the next one.
I don't think any of us can guess it. I mean, who would have guessed that 6 months later we would have still been home and working from home, especially after the way that we got picked up and moved to home.
It was shockingly quick.
Shockingly. But you say quick, but I think that encompasses a number of different aspects for how we move as business processes. For some of us, it was a long process. For some of us, it was quick. It was a very quick move to pick up your laptop and go. And we'll talk about a couple of those solutions today. But I think it's interesting that while we have hurricanes and we have the pandemic going on, one of the last discussions we had with Dan was about scams for COVID. Yeah. And I think scams don't fit any one box. They come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. They show up in different ways, but it's about what you see and what you're exposed to.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting that we had this topic. We've had this topic scheduled for a couple weeks, right? And very unfortunately, that's
another wrinkle of this entire thing.
Exactly. We felt kind of a bit uncomfortable about actually doing this today because we didn't want to feel like we were taking advantage of the current hurricane, but we've had this on the books for a couple of weeks. And the last time we all got together, I spent a little bit of time talking about COVID-19 related scams and how they're happening and what to look out for. Well, when we put this topic together a couple of weeks ago, one of the scams that I wanted to talk about is when there's a natural disaster, like there is right now, a lot of charities pop up to help distribute money and things to people that need it, right? That's terrific. And So us, with our compassion as humans, we want to donate to other people. We want to give to other people. So the scam that I want you to consider as listeners and try to avoid is being scammed into donating some money into something that's not legitimate, right? Just like we talked about a few weeks ago with the COVID-19 scams, you may get a text or you may get an email saying, donate to this place that is going to distribute your money to hurricane victims. And being compassionate, we look at it and we go, yeah, that's a great idea. Let me just click this link in this text that you don't really know who it's from, enter my credit card number, and then bam, I'm donating this money when actually you're not.
Yeah.
So that's something I wanted to point out, that people are going to try to take advantage of things that are timely, that they're urgent, which is what's happening right now. Another thing that I wanted to point out related to this was that, you may be getting emails and different organizations may be reaching out to you. And once you've decided you want to donate to some type of disaster or anything, take the time to go online and research who you're donating to. Figure out if there's some way that if it's illegitimate, you would get your money back. You remember the story a few years ago where these folks ran out of gas and a homeless man supposedly gave his last $10 or something like that to the folks and got him some gas. And everybody was like, oh, that's such a terrific thing for this homeless man to do. Well, it turns out the whole thing was a scam. Well, in the middle of that, these two folks and this gentleman that I guess portrayed to be homeless, they set up a GoFundMe for the man and they raised tons of money, right? And once it all came out in the courts, GoFundMe or whatever organization they used refunded everybody that donated. So consider that as you are donating money and figuring out what you want to do with your funds. See if you can donate into businesses that would refund you if something is not right. So that's my feedback for y'all today. Consider it, and we'll talk more next time we get together.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, because that's a really important piece because it's going to happen.
Right.
I think it was interesting that randomly during the week we mentioned a political text message that all of us got.
Yeah,
these lists aren't really centralized to just one specific area or group of people. These scams are really widespread. So it's about keeping your eye open for them. And that's more so from the individual perspective. But as a business, we want to talk about how we really start building processes, strategies, and protecting our technology and being prepared for us to be proactive rather than reactive in situations. Like we talked about with coronavirus showing up, we kind of had to pivot overnight.
Yep.
With a hurricane, you may have a couple of days for you to look at the weather and prepare for it, but every single business interruption or disaster is different and unique. So today we kind of want to just look at our strategies and processes and what it looks to have those in line, as well as pre-staging that technology that we're not caught flat-footed.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most important pieces that we recognize is really having constant communication that is also effective and efficient.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
We'll get into a couple of those, but I really want to start with our strategies and process.
Yeah.
When we changed our usual business process to COVID, because of COVID, there were some things that just happened very, very quickly. And it was because we had certain strategies and processes in place. And Ryan, I want to ask you, how did you feel we as a company were prepared for that? How do you feel like we enacted the necessary protocols for the changes in process, the changes in strategy to be efficient and effective, really?
Well, I think throughout our time as an organization, we've always had some sort of plan. And you mentioned at the top of the podcast here about, how quickly we could pivot, how quickly we can do things, and all that comes down to planning. So having a plan in place allows you to quickly reference it and follow that guidance through. Now, with each major disaster, hurricane, whatever it is, floods, we always adapt that plan. We always adapt that strategy, that process. We find gaps. We learn new things. Yep. And so I think that what we did as an organization early on in the pandemic is realize, okay, we were already geared and set up for working from home and working from remote because we did it during Harvey for 2.5 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people in the Houston area were down for 2-3 weeks. If you remember back to Hurricane Ike, we all didn't have power for, my house in Houston didn't have power for 3.5 weeks. I think I was the last person in the county to get back. And so you learn things through each and every event. that have to go into this strategy, this process document, right? Your business continuity plan that every organization, whether they're on the Gulf Coast or in Florida or in the middle of nowhere, you need to have, because it's hard to say when a natural disasters occur. And it's certainly even harder to say when a global pandemic's going to occur. Right. And so for us, I don't think we actually really had a great pandemic response plan as far as written down based specifically on being a pandemic. Now, a lot of federal agencies in the banking and the financial services vertical, like the FDIC and Texas Bankers Association, they've been pushing to their membership for the last, 3 or 4 years, your community banks, your national banks, that they need to have a pandemic plan. I don't think anyone could have foresaw this lasting 6 months, maybe 6 weeks on the high side. But for us, we quickly looked at what was happening and coming and said, okay, let's look at our work from home plan. Let's look at our hurricane and disaster plan. Let's assume worst case scenario and pivot that to a pandemic plan. And we were able to do that very quickly because at the end of the day, it was very similar. It was go home, move home. Right. And I can say, we enacted our hurricane preparation plan on Monday of this week. And involved in that is often looking at the weather forecast and the models of the hurricane and say, okay, where is this thing going to land? Where do we think? What's the cone of uncertainty? And so we shifted a number of resources out of their houses in Houston into a hotel in San Antonio on Tuesday night in preparation for if this did make landfall in Galveston like it was projected at the time, we'd at least be able to service our clients. Because again, we've got clients all over, not just in Houston and San Antonio, but all over the country that we need to be responsible for. Right. And so that's part of our standard hurricane plan that we put into action during a pandemic plan. So it's overlapping, which is even more fun and exciting.
Yeah, it overlaps. And some interesting things I wanted to point out related to what Ryan was talking about. First of all, the clients that I'm the account manager for, plenty of those clients had no idea we were working remote and actually, exercising our plan months later. They said, "What, you guys have been remote for this long? Wow. How did you do it?" Well, it's basically we took all our other plans and sort of adapted what we would do for the pandemic. So that was really interesting to me because our clients really didn't know. And, that's wonderful. That means everything's working seamlessly.
As it should.
Right. And some other things related to the subject that Ryan was just talking about as far as, planning and, strategies and process and all that stuff. We've had previous discussions on BCP planning and DR planning and things like that. The real quick points I wanted to talk about was, number one, if you haven't started, it's probably too late to start when you're in the middle of an event. Although you're going to learn plenty of things when you're in the event to document that you can then put in a plan in the future, right? So the thing that dovetails on that is if you haven't created a plan and a process and a strategy on what you would do if there was a hurricane, if there was a fire, if there was some type of internet issue, start today and just simply start writing out. The easiest way to start putting this stuff together is define the problem. And then secondly, what you need to operate, and then figuring out how to get that done in the face of that problem. And you can literally start with a piece of paper and a few people from your company and start putting that together. That costs very little money. I mean, it may cost people's time, right? To get them in a room, week over week, but it really costs very little money to start to brainstorm that. And what I like to say in our previous discussion is it's the journey of thinking about those things and creating the documentation. It's not about a destination where you have a physical notebook with a plan in it. That's terrific. And I've said that before, but it's the journey and thinking those things through that really give you the value. And that's what we're trying to do with our pandemic plan is we've had all these other plans and DR tests and us as a company, we've done all this other stuff. And the journey is what put us in a position to where when we reacted to the pandemic, it's pretty seamless, pretty cool.
Well, and it's a living document, Dan. It's never really done.
Correct.
Your journey analogy, I think, is great because you're always updating it. You're always learning new things through each crisis, and keeping that document up to date is critical for those that follow along. And it gives you a reference or a playbook that anyone in the organization can follow on, and they know who's responsible for what. And maybe it's not a who, but a position, a title in the organization, because people come and go, unfortunately, in our organizations. And you've got to make sure that at least someone is in charge.
Yep.
And so for us in our plan, all of our plans have a primary, secondary, and tertiary communications czar, if you will, or a lead on any response plan.
Yeah, we'll talk about that here in a couple of slides as far as who owns different things, how are they designated. We'll talk about that here in a couple of slides as well.
I think one of the interesting parts that both of you have really harped on is how your hurricane and pandemic plans, our hurricane and pandemic plans, kind of overlapped. Ryan, you said that you weren't necessarily 100% happy with how it went, but that's
I was happy with how it went.
Had,
it just wasn't named a pandemic plan.
Fair enough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think one of the important things is looking at the scope of what a plan entails. When you look at the strategies and process, there are going to be things that overlap. But like you said, this is a living document. There are going to be experiences that you simply learn from that then become a part of that document as an experience-based solution that is now in place. And I think part of that ties into pre-staging technology. Yeah. So when we talk about pre-staging, how do you identify what I need ahead of time?
Yeah.
So we have all these things that we want to put processes in place for, but what are we putting processes to do? Yeah. What are we going to make sure is in our critical chain? Yeah. Is vital to our business running on a daily basis. Question. How do we start looking at that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Ryan and I, we've been in meetings with clients where we talk about this. How do you identify this? Because, a downstream employee in HR may use a software that they feel like is critically important to their job. And the managers in the same company don't think it's critical at all, right? The output of that particular thing. So what I suggest is when people are starting to put these plans together and understanding what needs to be staged and what needs to exist in a plan, when the plan is being executed, and Ryan can speak to this as a business owner, but from my perspective, how the things you need to understand that need to work is how do you receive payments as a business? How do you take in money and so you can run your business?
That's certainly the one I'm most important.
I hear you, right? How do you get money? How can you pay your employees and keep them employed? How can you pay your vendors? And then how can you provide a service, the service that you have? So in our case, it's IT, remote IT support and projects and things like that. And it's as simple as that. How can you take in revenue to then run your business? And then how do you provide your service? So in our environment, do we really need to do a bunch of huge marketing events where we travel all over and talk about how awesome we are? Is that critical to running our business? It's not. So what do you need to do to run your business to generate revenue that get your people paid? And how does that happen? Right. And so Ryan, for our business, what are those critical things that absolutely have to happen with us?
Yeah, I think that obviously getting paid is critical, but paying our people is even more so critical.
True.
And so really it's can you bill, can you cash? Right. Those are your top three for really any business.
Right.
Universal. So I think one of the lessons we learned during Harvey was we were out of the office for 2.5 weeks. The office never lost power. The Houston office never lost internet connectivity. I know I was sitting here in San Antonio watching the cameras going, is there water in the lobby? I don't know.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like it. But, one of the things we learned is, mail. The U.S. Postal Service didn't show up. And so because they couldn't physically drive to the building.
Yeah.
So one of those things is, so we weren't receiving, payments. Okay, if this goes on much longer, what do we have a cash flow problem? So one of the things we learned in Harvey was let's get an online payment portal set up for our clients that are still using traditional checks.
Solve the problem.
We still have a process to solve this problem.
Right.
And it's becoming more critical now during the pandemic simply because the mail service has slowed down. You've got mail substations closed due to COVID testing positive. And so really that online payment portal system has added a lot of benefits, but it was a lesson we learned during Harvey, a few years ago.
And then you documented it, implemented it, and now that we're in the pandemic plan, we already have the system in place.
It's already ready. It's already running. Everybody's used to using it.
Right.
If you're still doing payroll in house, I was talking to a friend of mine, talking about getting your people paid, which is equally as critical.
Sure.
We use an outside payroll service, right? It's all electronically deposited into every employee's bank account. We're not cutting real checks in the office. Do you have your check stock with you? I mean, that's one of the things in our old hurricane pandemic or our old hurricane plan was, and we went through this in previous office before we went very electronic, was make sure we grab our check stock
and the Micker printer.
And you need the printer.
You need
all these things.
Okay,
well, let's evac. Let's get all this stuff. And even before the days of internet-enabled telephones, grab the phones, forward the service to sell. Like all these different things are in the plan. as we become more cloud enabled, and you talk about pre-staging the technology, enabling the technology to allow you to work from anywhere, I think has been game changing. And a lot of this technology is just so, it's so new to a lot of us, right?
It's our normal
point.
Yeah. Our normal operating technology is built perfectly for the pandemic because it enables us to operate from everywhere, right? And a lot of the clients that we consult with, Ryan and I have been in the meeting the last couple of days on a new potential client, but our goal with their technology is to get it where they can work anywhere. You know, their mail is available anywhere, their file, system is available anywhere, messaging anywhere, their line of business application, basically available anywhere. And
having it work just like it works in the office.
Exactly.
No matter where you are, makes it so much easier just from an employee change management standpoint. You don't want to retrain or have everybody flip a switch in their brain to say, oh, we're work from home now. How do I do that again?
Right.
No. The best thing you can do from a technology perspective is to have the technology serve the business needs regardless of locale.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And you bring up that critical point, Ryan, of business, of servicing the business. When we talk about business continuity, there shouldn't be a change in full process that takes people out of their norm. They should just continue
that's the best case scenario.
As normal. That's the best case scenario.
Sure.
And the current heavy reliance upon SaaS, Dan, you really harped on that. And that's a really good point, that people are moving towards file services, cloud services for file management. We've seen a lot of migration to SharePoint. Yep. And it's been a change in process of people understanding this is a different reliance upon VPN in your hardware in the building, and more so, where can I work from? Where is all of my hardware where's all of my software going to be available from? So that heavy allowance on SaaS has really allowed us to now move into a point that we can be mobile.
Yeah.
That a pandemic, we're prepared for that. Now, what's the next disaster or
probably zombies,
interruption that happens?
Locusts. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, but that's an interesting thing. You went directly to nature. It's not always nature based.
That's true.
Yeah. One of the key things that we really talk about with our customers is backups. We talk to them about backing up their Office 365 infrastructure.
Yeah.
We talk to them about the fact that we need to make sure that in the case that the way that we like to put it is someone with a big butt turns and knocks something off. If this server dies,
I saw it. Yes, it happened.
I've
told the story. Yeah. I told the story in I think our last webinar where I was with a coworker at a client site, and we were doing some stuff, and there's a server rack, and this guy turned around and his big old derriere bumped the server cabinet, and it pulled out a power supply and all this stuff.
Derriere isn't a word you hear used.
Hey, it's one of my.
That's nice.
Dan's sophisticated.
I'm a sophisticated man.
All right.
But related to this particular topic, something that I want to get out of my brain real quick is, kind of merging the last slide and this slide, right? You have your processes and you have everything you're putting together to enact during your DR plan or during your BCP plan. You got all this stuff you're going to do, right? Well, if you change your normal processes, significantly, that creates risk. That can create confusion. That can create, related to this slide, security issues, right? So what we've seen as people have moved to working during the pandemic is everybody's working from home. Okay, that's terrific. Maybe they can get to their SharePoint, they can get to their mail, they can get to their line of business application, but they're using their home computer. That home computer hasn't been updated in 3 years, and nobody paid for the antivirus software, and it's insecure, right? So they've had this change in the way they do their process, but it's created new security problems. So, the folks listening, if it's IT folks or management folks or operations folks, as you're figuring out how to respond and how to adapt to changes in your environment, whether it's pandemic or whatever it is, consider how that affects your security. I know it's related to this slide, Branson, which is why I wanted to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
Your security needs are going to change with different solutions.
Well, harkening back to that, Dan, it's one of the biggest frauds we've seen committed during COVID. And I think you may have talked about this on a previous webinar, but you see this wire fraud or the CFO fraud.
Oh, yes.
There's been over a
yeah.
70% increase in COVID-related scams and a lot of phishing and email scams.
Mhm.
And the reason it's successful, and I talk to MSP business owners across the country, I talk to other business owners, this is happening more than I've seen before. And we've been seeing a lot of it the last few years. But during COVID, it's happening and it's successful. And the reason is everyone's working remotely and their processes weren't adapted to that.
Right.
So, hey, can you send this wire to close this deal? It's now happening more on email.
Right.
And you're less likely to stand up in the office and say,
Yes.
hey, did you really just send this to me? Because no one's in the office.
Right. That's exactly
And so it's
right.
allowing for these scams to honestly be more successful than they ever have been.
Yeah, and the hardware layer is different when you're at home, and I kind of alluded to that, but you don't have firewall. You don't have enterprise-grade firewalls that are blocking traffic. You don't have, alerting systems that tell you when things are going in and out of your business that shouldn't be. And so, speaking to Ryan's point, it's made the targets a lot softer when you have a CEO sitting in his home with his firewall that's never been patched on his personal computer that may not be patched, that may not have antivirus. That's a lot easier target to hit as if I'm a malicious actor.
Which is why we have to be prepared for it, which is why we have to pre-stage the technology to allow for it, and why all of this data security and backup is even more important than it ever has been. Because we may not go back this year to the office. We may not go back to a traditional workforce for quite some time. And honestly, many pundits out there are saying the world is forever changed. We've seen digital transformation go from 3 years to 3 weeks, and companies are starting to see the value of working from home. Employees, certainly. I know I polled our team, early on in this and just said, hey, what's your comfort level? When do you want to go back? Do you like it? Resoundingly, everybody loves working from home, which shocked me because I hate it.
Yeah. Send it again.
That may have to do with just too many people at home. And
send the survey again, Ryan.
Yeah. I think now that we're month 6, I should redo the survey and see if everybody wants to come back to work or not. But I told them, it's like we're not going to go back. We got to get in this long haul mindset.
Right.
And the same thing comes down to your business continuity plan for whatever natural disaster, man-made, whatever it is. And is it a long-term? How long can it go? What's your stage gates for going back? What's your return to operations look like after going into a disaster?
Yes, that's exactly right. And that would be part of your BCP plan as well. You enact your plan and you have an alternate way that you work, right? So normally, say a hurricane wipes out your office, you have an alternate way that you work for a few weeks, but then the plan has the instruction on what you do when you convert back, because there's things you're going to miss. There's security issues that are going to reveal itself, all this stuff. That's part of the exercise. And we haven't talked about it on this call yet, but a really important thing about your processes and your strategy that we talked about at the beginning is testing your plan. Testing what you've pre-staged. And we've kind of gotten past that on the slides, but I definitely want to bring that up because it's I think it's the right place, Dan. It's a critical piece because
as you know, I always say if it's not backed up, it doesn't exist. And if the plan isn't tested, it's not really a plan.
It's exactly right. Because you're going to find things in the testing. Again, it's the journey, not the destination. When you're testing your plan and you sit down and say what you're testing is internet services are down. So you sit in your corporate office and you basically unplug the firewall from the internet. You say, okay, what do we do? How do we work? Who needs to do what? And that effort and that test maybe twice a year is super valuable in revealing things that you may not have known otherwise. And related to backups,
we call a tabletop. Dan.
It is. It is.
A live action tabletop exercise. Maybe it's a Saturday afternoon.
Correct.
Let's go through the plan and actually make it happen.
Make it happen.
We've had people in a data center before during those plans to pull the internet connection out and say, hey, luckily they didn't actually use scissors to cut it, but we thought about it just to be really dramatic. But you pull it out and you see what breaks, and you learn from those experiences. You learn by doing.
Yeah, you really do. I'm sorry, Branson, go ahead.
No, it's just one of the things I really enjoy about the tabletop experience is it takes you out of a central vision of what can happen. Sometimes we just say hurricane. Sometimes we just say internet goes out. But I'm in a colo. But what happens if that colo goes down? Let's go.
Colo. What if you
can't get to the colo?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many different things. Harvey was not something that I necessarily would have generally thought about. I just can't get to the building. Okay, everything else keeps functioning, but what do we do at that point in time? So I think it's really important to recognize what a tabletop encompasses. All those different opportunities for what could possibly go wrong, and to try and prepare yourself for those things.
Yeah,
it's very scenario based.
It really is.
Yes.
And the most successful ones I've been a part of, they're done a couple times a year, and the leader of the tabletop will bring in 4 or 5 scenarios sort of printed out on paper, not tell anybody about them. And all your stakeholders sit in a room, your IT people, maybe your ops people, different people sit there and they go, okay, here's the first scenario. They set out the piece of paper and it says there's been a chemical spill due to a train derailment. We can't get in the office. It'll take 4 days to clean up. Nobody's seen that before. And then you start executing your plan and you brainstorm it and you actually figure it out, right? One thing before I lose what I'm thinking of, which of course has never happened before, related to backups. I'm going to give everybody on the call a pro tip, or on the webinar a pro tip related to backups. What we've seen often, especially as we take over support for new clients, is people have been moving to Office 365, and that's terrific, right? But what we're seeing as we take over new clients or begin their support is Office 365 itself isn't backed up. So make sure that if you guys are using Office 365 as a platform, you need to have a third party.
Service.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any software as a service, anything's hosted by somebody else, whether it's Microsoft or somebody else.
Gmail.
You want a third
Google
party
Apps.
backup. You want
Third
something
party, unrelated. Correct.
Yep.
Correct. So make sure that if you're using those platforms, ask your IT folks, ask your vendors, hey, is this backed up by a third party? And if they say no, you need to ask why.
And the biggest reason with Office 365, because I sometimes get pushed back in the sales cycle, Microsoft's handling that, I'm sure it's being done. It's Microsoft's handling it if the data center explodes. Right. And then they can get you all your mail in your tenancy back in one hit. Right. What they don't protect you from is a malicious actor going in and just deleting your specific mailbox, just deleting a couple key emails, or an employee accidentally doing it. That's not what they do. But in the old day, when we had the email servers in-house, we had backup software. We could restore 1Z, 2Z emails. In Office 365, Microsoft's not built like that. So you need that third-party solution to restore should a malicious actor get in there, or should an employee accidentally fat finger something. You've got to have that third-party backup to ensure you're running. And true on anything, whether you're running QuickBooks Online, look at the third-party backup options of that. You just don't want to put all your eggs in one basket.
So I'm glad y'all brought that up, because some of the solutions that we use for that Office 365 backup is it expands much more than just email. A lot of us, when we think about Office 365, we default to Outlook. We default to email. Okay, I'm backing up my email if an email gets deleted. Now, the solutions that we use back up everything that's in that suite. SharePoint, OneDrive. I believe there's another piece of it, but they back up file tools that when you look at it, what we recognize is if you have a file server on-prem, what happens if that file server craters? We want to make sure that we have a backup in place. When we migrate people to SharePoint, adding that to your centralized stack of backup solutions for that SaaS product, it gives them a little bit more security, but also it goes into that data security piece of being protected behind a multi-factor authentication suite.
Yeah, that's the security component.
So it puts everything really in the same boat, but it also ties into how we communicate, our collaboration, because with us changing our process of how we do work, for us, we haven't been able to be meerkats. We haven't been able to pop up and say, hey, what's that?
Explain that, Branson, to the folks listening. Like, what do we like? Why do we use first of all, so people know we're the meerkats, right? It's our jam.
So we're the meerkats. So as we started years ago, it was a small group of 4 to 5 of us that could stand up and just say, hey, I hear a problem. How can I help you with that? And now it's grown to our 3rd floor that is not currently in use.
Regretfully empty, but I'm still paying rent on.
There goes.
Here we go.
But it allowed us to be able to stand up over a cube or look across the office and say, hey, I just got an email on that. I see that same problem. I think I can add value and quickly help you get to the solution of your problem. Now we've had to change our meerkatting to more so knocking on people's team's door and saying, hey, you got a quick sec for a call? And we've had, it's interesting. One of the pieces that I've been happy about is we've had to have discussions about etiquette and what it means to have that constant, consistent communication while being respectful of others' space, although you can't physically see it.
Yeah. What I saw, so when we first went into pandemic planning, the way that Branson described it really well, we have this thing where the meerkats, and what meerkats do is they pop up out of their holes in the ground and they help other meerkats and they alert other meerkats to trouble and all this stuff, right? Well, that's what we want to do. We want to pop up out of our cubes, say, hey, I heard you need some help, or I heard this term, or I heard this, I can help, right? So we run our business like that. We have these big open areas of work, and Branson worked in one with the pro services team, right? So when we all went remote and we were all sitting at our home computers, there wasn't a good way to hear something that maybe you could help with and that type of thing. So what we saw as a company is all of that communication started happening in email, right? And it just gums up the works.
I remember doing Harvey. We were using email instead of Teams back then.
Oh man,
the email just to get the message to load crashed my
problem. Yeah, it's a problem. You have all these different emails on all these different threads that are related to the same thing that have 50 different entries in them. So what we were able to do, and really led by our COO, Mr. Moore, who I'm sure will be on the next call, we adapted the way we
I'm
work.
doing a really good job.
Well, okay. So Ryan, you're in. I'm out. No, so what we did is we had to adapt. We don't want to deal with that stuff in email. It doesn't make any sense. We also can't pop up out of our cube and say, hello, what do we do? So we started using Teams as a platform to manage our communication, so we could basically instantly ask somebody a question, but also not interrupt them. We could take that traffic out of email. Within the Teams platform, you can have calls, video calls, chat. You can send funny cat gifs. You can do all kinds of stuff. You can link to SharePoint sites. You can do all this great stuff. And we've really adapted to that product. And that's what we use as our primary form of communication. It works really, really well.
But it's important to have in your BCP, your business continuity plan, the outline of how you're going to communicate, when, where, how, right? So,
yes,
I had a client reach out to me directly earlier this week as the hurricane was approaching and really targeting Houston at the time, and said, hey, we had this like text messaging app that we'd be able to blast out to our 500 employees, all of our warehouse workers. They don't have email, they don't have Teams, and somebody forgot to log on. And they were going to, how do you communicate? Whoops. Okay, so we're inventing the BCP during, but how do you communicate with people, right? How are you going to communicate, hey, the office is down, the office is closed, the office caught fire, if people aren't checking their Teams on a Sunday night or an email? So having ways to communicate outside of your normal business process during a business continuity event is also critically important. But again, having it documented, having it so, hey, we're going to use this service. It's going to blast text messages out, or it's going to blast a voice message out to people, leave them a voicemail on their cellular phones or their home phones. Having that all outlined and how you communicate is a great feature.
Right.
I mean, and who's to say their internet's not out? Let's talk about Harvey. I mean, we have people's internet come in and out. They're not getting, emails, or even the cell towers sometimes go down. So it's really about multimodal communication methods. And a lot of these systems, like if you really need to broadcast to your employee base of, hey, we have this crisis, whatever it might be, you want to do it on multiple channels, right? Whether it's text message, whether it's voice phone calls, and you want a system or program in place where it's click button easy. Because chances are you as the primary or secondary on your BCP plan liaison is also dealing with their family running or evacuating or something like that. So there's just a lot of different things to think about during that tabletop exercise, during this business continuity plan creation process of how are we going to do these steps and what's important, what's primary, secondary, tertiary from an importance standpoint.
Who, how, and when is really important, right? Ryan talked about it earlier that we always suggest to our clients that you don't, in your plan, you don't name people. You don't say Dan Mallard's the person in charge of this thing, right? Doesn't work. Dan Mallard made who knows what, go live in Aruba, right? So you say maybe
my man.
I don't know, Dan. Maybe then you'll get a better tan.
Oh, come on, man! I've been getting really tan. I don't know why you did this. This light.
I don't think you've left your office in 6 months. You've been indoors. You gotta get some sun.
This light is poor. So it is kind of a bluish light, which I didn't intend.
Which is intriguing.
Over there. It's intriguing. So, but what we ask our clients to do is not put specific people in the plan, put position, right, and then also determine, delineate how and when they're going to communicate, right? And to who, because
who's in charge of the communication,
who's in charge of it. And because the worst thing that we see, one of the bad things we see during some type of disaster event is multiple people communicating to the same team, trying to coordinate things. And it's a disaster. It's terrible. So and everybody's trying to do their best.
Who dictates that? Who really should?
Sure. It's in the plan, right? So then you say, well, then who puts the plan together, right? So that kind of leads to that question. So what I've seen in my experience is you have one person, and that could be an HR person, could be an ops person, could be an IT person, that is in charge of the final that is in charge of the plan, right? And they're always in charge of the plan.
They're kind of the incident response lead.
They're the lead
commander, if we want to use military
terms. And if it's the person putting the thing together, maybe it's somebody different. But you always have one person that's in charge of the actual planning process. You know, they're putting the groups together of the operations team to figure out the plan and everything. But you have one person, and it can be anybody. For our company, it works real well for our COO to coordinate and put the plan together. And then also that's the same person to execute the plan from the highest level when we do have an event. So we're small enough for about 50 people that it's the same person, but it could be theoretically two different people that develop the plan versus actually enact and lead from the top down plan.
Fair. Yeah. And really putting a plan in place really, it minimizes the risk of things going wrong very quickly. Yeah. That's what we've seen. If you don't have, like you said, Dan, you have the worst situation you can have is when multiple people are firing off stuff. Yeah. I remember years ago when I started here at IronEdge, we had an issue that started, and on two different sides of the office, we had two different email threads going to a client.
That's the worst.
So we had two different people in the same portal fixing an issue. Yeah. So it wasn't just the communication, it ended up impacting the work on the backside. Yes. So a totality of really everything that we've talked about is how do we start minimizing risk? How do we start minimizing risk of these events happening and us not being able to react proactively rather than reactively?
Right. Everything we've talked about to this point leads us to this goal, right? Which is everything we've talked about, mush it all together in a ball. And then what we're trying to do with that ball is minimize risk. Right. And the risk that can be is us continuing to operate as a business, not losing market share, not losing employees because you can't pay them. Those are all massive risks. So that's what we're trying to do is we put all this stuff together so we can operate in a disaster or in an event in a way that keeps our clients happy, that keeps our employees with us. You know, that's the risk that we want to avoid. So everything that we put together to this point is for that goal.
Yeah, and Ryan, I know you'll agree, but the biggest risk is not making money. A lot of times,
risk is going out of business.
It really is, and we've seen
how many people during this pandemic have failed. I mean, my heart bleeds for the local restaurant owners and all these different industries impacted so directly by a pandemic. I don't know how, if you're, a concert venue, that you ever had a pandemic plan. Like, how do you stay in business when the government won't let you operate?
I have friends in that industry. It's horrible. It's not great. Yeah.
Absolutely horrible. Yeah. So we really have to look at your business and look at kind of how do you minimize risk for you? What's important?
Yeah, that's the summary, right?
Identify, so very, very high level, but what's the most important for you guys to continue operations, to continue functioning, continue to serve your clients, your customers, and your employees, and minimize the risk as best you can, the best you can foresee.
Right. Yeah. Do it early and often. Continually update how you're documenting minimizing that risk, and you're on your way there.
Yeah, and I think, Dan, you said it earlier. If you're starting now, you're a little too late, but better late than never.
Better late than never.
But this is 2020, so chances are we'll have like 42 more hurricanes.
That's true. Who knows what could happen?
So who knows what's next?
Yeah.
That's
I'm waiting for someone to come out with a magic 8-ball of 2020. Where you just shake it up and the next thing occurs.
Yeah, it's like disaster.
It's like we're living in the game Jumanji. Just waiting to roll that die.
Great.
What? But that's the thing. In Jumanji, it's not if something happens, it's when something happens.
Hey,
there's no better way to plan than planning on when it's going to happen.
That's exactly true. And maybe to wrap this thing up, we say it's not if your company hits a disaster or has to enact a BCP plan, right? We learned that this year. It's
all of us. Exactly.
It's win. Yeah. So the time invested to start to think about this stuff and to pull in potentially a company like ours, or to work with your internal ops team or whatever you need to do to start your processes moving forward, developing this stuff, it's going to be well spent, because there will be some time that you have to use it. 100%.
Yep.
And in reality land, like if we really think about it, this year we've seen a lot of different things occur, but 90% of the time it's going to be, the disaster is really going to be more in line with, your building caught fire. It's going to be something that we're all more used to dealing with than a global healthcare crisis. So really think of it in that way, as like, make your plan malleable to whatever potential event, on how you continue to, operate your business, function, communicate with your staff, communicate with your customers. I know for our clients that are in financial services and banking, they have an entire system. I know as a bank customer, I got a text saying, hey, during the beginning of the pandemic, our branches are now closed. We will only be operating a drive-through at this location. Like, they had a communication plan for the pandemic to talk to not only their staff, but their end customers on what to expect. And managing expectations through a natural disaster, man-made, pandemic, whatever it is a critical component to any BCP.
True. Very true. Very true. A lot of things for not just business owners, but technical staff, management, to really look at and analyze for how they minimize their risk in the event that a business interruption or disaster shows up. Because like we said, it's not if, but when. Right. So doing these tabletops, looking at your strategies and processes and what's in place is going to be extremely beneficial to how you recover and how you achieve your RTOs in the end. So I'd like to thank Dan and Ryan for joining us today. I'm Branson Braid, and thank you again for joining us for this week's webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
See you soon.